Well, hello and welcome to today's webinar, the Alpha Anywhere Q&A webinar. I'm Dave McCormick, and I'm pleased to present Dion McCormick. While Dion and myself both share the same last name, we are not related, though we both claim to be heirs of the McCormick spice fortune. Today, Dion is going to answer your Alpha Anywhere questions, which you can type into the GoToWebinar questions box. So let's get started. Dion, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me loud and clear?
I sure can. I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter.
Dynamite. Excellent. Welcome. As we always say in the McCormick clan, the spice must flow. A little sci-fi.
little Dune humor there.
If you can name that movie, you get a big bonus there. So excellent. Thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate you coming with us today. We are going to, I've got a couple quick announcements, specifically some new information that's come out that I want to share with everybody, and also a discussion of our plan for next week's webinar. And with that, then we'll dive right into the Q&A portion. So as always, please go ahead and submit your questions using the GoToWebinar control panel. Go ahead and queue those up, because then we can move right through them and answer them. And we welcome your attendance. We're here to support you. We're excited that you're using the Alpha technology, and we love to help you and also love to see what you build. So make sure to not only ask us questions, but let us know what you're working on and how we can be of help for you. The Alpha platform continues to grow, develop, and get incredibly powerful, and it's amazing the kind of visibility. There's been a lot of industry press lately on the Alpha platform, so the Alpha message of low-code ability to build great products with the tool is getting out there, and we're very excited on that, and we'll be doing that. So two things. One is, first, I want to announce, and this just was announced this week, that coming up is a Alpha Anywhere Masterclass series. You can find this on our blog at alphasoftware.net, and you'll see a link for that. But what this is really powerful, is that these are going to be live classes. These are not pre-recorded, although they will be recorded for the attendees to be able to review. But these are live classes with the experts, people like Dan Bricklin and Bob Moore, the people who are actually writing, coding, and delivering what this is, what the product is. So these series of live classes are with the architects of the product, and in that you will not only have the ability to see them kind of give the flavor and the depth and the of their different perspective areas, but also there's Q&A, so you can bring all of your detailed questions about all of the different elements that you're interested in. So for instance, if you're building phone gap solutions, you'll have Bob Moore, who's delivering and designing that capability. If you're building incredible user interfaces using CSS, we're going to have Dan Bricklin, who's driving the whole CSS, HTML, Alpha integration, which will allow you to develop beautiful, beautiful interfaces, and to create products like the Alpha Rita, which Dan has, which is built on Alpha, that's on the Apple Store, and will be a wonderful capability. So please join this. On this, you can go to the alphasoftware.net blog site, and there's lots of details there, including the sign-up information, etc., and I recommend you checking that out. Also, just a quick announcement. I was going to cover this week, but we decided to do it a little bit better. Is next week we're going to go through the core content from the Alpha Dev 2014. Specifically, we're going to walk through the different sessions, what are the key messages, some of the highlights. There's a web page that's been developed and being put online that will have recordings, the presentations, the background, etc., to see this information. And what we'll do is go through the different key topics from the Devs conference, answer your questions about those topics, give you some flavor on that, and also make sure you can go and find where to find follow-on, say, videos and other presentations from the conference, because it was just an amazing event with an enormous amount of content and information, and very, very valuable. So we really want to go into detail and share that with you. So with that said, if I could ask you to go ahead and ask your questions on the GoToWebinar control panel. Dave, my counterpart, will queue them up. We'll answer those. If we can't answer them as usual, we'll take notes and come back with that on there. And also, I've got it set up so we can show little demos and everything else that you need. But we do really appreciate everybody joining us this week and each week. And we're here to help you out. So let us know how we can help you out with questions, whatever you have there. While we're waiting for questions, just my question to the group is, anybody heading down here to Austin, Texas for the Formula One races that are coming up very soon? A phenomenal event. This is I think it's the third year that they're coming up with. Just an incredible event, very, very successful and very exciting. Brings in a higher quality of crowd into the Austin area when the Formula One's in town. They drop a lot of coin. It's pretty amazing from that standpoint. I'm still waiting for questions, Phil. Now I feel like a radio host, from that standpoint.
Exactly.
Very cool stuff, man. It's fun to be involved with Alpha, just as a personal. And again, I'm kind of filling while I'm waiting for questions. But every week, it's like, and I joke around with the guys, and I hope the developers don't get mad at me or take this incorrectly, but I like to call them the Oompa Loompas. So if anybody's a fan of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the Alpha has an incredible set of Oompa Loompas that are very busy behind the scenes developing incredible capabilities. And every week I get a little glimpse into some new stuff, some new capability that's coming along. And it's just really, really fun and coming along really well. And each and every one of those things is highly designed to make life easier for the developer and make it simpler for them to develop and put together the solutions they are. So, good question. I've got my first question here. It is, how can I get a beta plugin for IIS? And just a little flavor for the other folks is that the Alpha application server was a standalone server product that ran on a Windows server. Recently, we have released a beta of the IIS plugin. So you'll be able to actually take the Alpha application server and run it as a plugin within the IIS infrastructure, which makes it, for Microsoft shops, they love that because it gives them finer control. Plus, for developers, it allows them to tap into the IIS infrastructure to be able to tap LDAP, security authorization, other pieces like that. Dave, I think the best bet on that would be to send it to Brett, a request to
Actually,
Brett at Alpha Software.
Send it either to Chris at alphasoftware.com, or you can send it to me, Dave at alphasoftware.com. And either way, we will get that process for you, and we'll get you out the key that you need and the download link.
Yeah, and I'm going to type that in, Chris at alphasoftware.com or Dave at alphasoftware.com, and I'll send that to everybody there. So that's in there. So send us an email on that. We'll get you hooked up on that. We'd love to have you adopt and start working with it because the beauty of that is that will allow us to start really seeing what your impressions are and get that back into our developer team from theirs.
Here's a great question. This one is
sir.
from Clive, who asks, one of our developers asked, what happens to the code they write within Alpha when they later change things and need to recompile? I presume that the question is, does it get overwritten, which is typically what happens with code generators. But if you want to go ahead and handle that, that would be great.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate that, Clive. First is that when you modify the user interface, it's actually generating the code to develop the user interface. And so if you modify your user interface, it's going to write over that. But you really usually don't go into that code because that is just used to present the user interface and the interactivity there. If you have extended your UX controls through your own code, that code is not going to get overridden. So you can feel confident that you can go in and make modifications to the system, i.e. add a new grid, add a new UX control, and any code that you already have will be preserved, even if you're developing, say, a UX. So let me go ahead and go into the Alpha environment so I can give you there. So let's say I am working with a UX control. Okay, so this is my UX control builder, and for folks that are new to it, basically a UX is a form control. Think of it as forms. So I have my form objects here. On the left are the things I can select, and on the right here. Now, if I were to modify one of these controls, it's going to auto-generate the form, which is no problem. And in fact, kind of a neat little thing, and I recommend you don't touch it, but if you look at this is sort of your visual version. If you look down here, you have XBasic. And this is actually the code that's auto-generated that has all the different panels and other things there. So really all this code is a representation of these pieces here. Now if I were to change one of these controls, it's going to regenerate that, but that's no big deal. What is powerful though is that if I go into my code on my server-side events, or I've added JavaScript functions or XBasic functions, those will not get overridden. So if I make a change to this, then that will be preserved. And the real beauty of that is that you're kind of separating your user interface from your code so that you don't have an issue of things breaking or like that for situation goes there. Now, so the control here will get overwritten when you save it with the newest version of it, and that's why we're working more and more on version control. But let me show you one other thing which I think would be very valuable for developers. Let's say I'm working on this ACC demo, and I go in here and I come to it and I say, you know what, I want to go ahead and change my back button to say back it's a trap. Okay, so that, and again, another movie reference, let's see what's going on there. So now in my working preview, I look at this thing, I've modified my user interface, so now I have a new button here that says, and it's waking up, so bear with me as of course this is demo, so there you go. Notice it's saying back, it's a trap. Okay, so I'm all good with that, and then, so I go ahead and I deploy that, and then all of a sudden someone calls me and says, oh, that's not what I want to do it. Well, actually a neat feature built into Alpha Anywhere is that when you change any one of these controls, Alpha automatically generates a quick little backup of it. So I go back to this ACC demo, I right-click, and I say Restore Backup. And again, so I click on a control, and I say Restore Backup. Now you'll notice in here now, it's giving me a list of all the times I've changed that control. And as you can see, this one I've done a lot because it's a demo, I tend to modify it a lot. But you'll notice now I've got a time and date stamp that says last time I saved this control was today at 12:12 at 31 p.m. And I can sit there and say, you know what, that one I want to do. So I can right-click on it, or I just select that one and I say restore this file. And it's going to say, do you really want to do this? And I say yes. Okay, so now I've done a restore, and I go back into my system, and you'll notice, oh, I didn't restore to the right one. Let me go ahead and restore that back up to this one. This was the change I made with the It's a Trap, but I want to go back to this one, which was earlier. So I'm going to restore this file, and then I'm going to go into here, and I'm going to have to go back farther. Let me go back farther. I must have saved it a couple times. So let me restore backup. There we go. That's going to be it, because that's on the 23rd of this month. And so I go back into it, and you're going to notice now, third time's the charm, my back button now doesn't have that text. So I've gone back. Now, very important for you to understand is my new versions are gone because I basically overwrote my new versions. So if I had made changes, then I can't go back forward in time. But this is a really handy thing to have. It kind of demonstrates what the system's kind of protecting you if you do something that you really dislike. And any changes to this, including both user interface and code changes, will be backed up every time you save it. So if I were to say save again, it creates a new version from that standpoint there. So back to your original question, and I apologize, I kind of went off on a tangent, but if you actually modify any code around these controls, that code's going to be preserved, and then you can obviously back it out using the backup capability and modify it from there. What I often do is if I'm going to do, I can also make just a duplicate of this control, modify it, and then save it under the original name is another technique I use, but not really necessary now that you have the backup. And I got to tell you, there's been a number of times that have saved my tail. What I'll do is that, let's say I've made a bunch of changes to this, and I don't want to deploy it to the production server yet, so, but I do want to make a quick fix on it. What I will do is I'll take my most current version I'll make a duplicate of it, and I'll say, you know, like in process. Okay, so I've made a duplicate of where it is right now, and then I go back to the original component and I do a restore backup, sort of a poor man's there, and so I can restore back file. Oh, it does collect in the future, and then I can go into here and then start modifying it based on a previous. So I guess we can go back back to the future. You can't. I apologize, I was there. So it allows you some tricks to manage this information, deploy this one, and then bring it back into the system. So very flexible, very easy to use, and something to be aware of. So Clive, I hope that has answered your question. If not, please let me know that is how I can answer that properly.
Great. So the questions are rolling in now. Next question is from Eddie.
Everybody got their coffee in them.
Exactly. His question is, he's building a web application that sends email from a grid. And his question is, how can he create conditions for the body of the message text, sort of like a mail merge based on values in the tables of the field?
Ah, gotcha. Okay. What I'd like to show you is that built into Alpha is a very strong set of is a very strong set of email functional capabilities. So in particular, there is an internal email capability that runs on the server that connects to SMTP. There is also built into this the new capability to use Mandrill, which I talk a lot because I got to tell you, it's a really powerful capability. It allows you to create very easy to use email process. So the email said, let me find it real quick. So I just recorded that too. So let me go over here to my favorite thing, which is, and it will show up there, bear with me. Let's go here to Mandrill. By the way, I use Evernote a lot to remember these kind of little things here. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this into, let's see, why is it not pasting? I'm trying to copy and paste this. Copy, paste. Oh, it's not pasting in there, so I'll have to look there. Okay, so we have the ability using the email send capability to create your own messages. And how that works is the following, and this is just a little piece of sample code I want to show you, is that in your XBasic callback, when you do this, you're going to most likely use an XBasic column. So let's say you had a grid and you had a button, you said call back and send this email. Well, what you'll be able to do is you can write this little piece of code that says send it to who, CC, BCC, the from email, the subject. So you notice this is all just text. So you can put this together and you can use any command to put in like if then else's in here to say if the data is this, send this message. And as you can see, here's the actual text message. It's just a piece of text. And you can generate that using different methodologies. So what you're going to be able to do is that when you do the Ajax callback, what will happen is that it will then allow you to then in code generate that email. And in there, you're going to dynamically generate the message. Now, when you do your Ajax callback, let me go ahead and show you this real quick. I'm going to put in a button here, just a random button here, so I can kind of show you the process. So hopefully that will give you some pointers on how to do that. So I'll go to button, and I'm going to call this callback. And you'll be able to put this button either on like a UX control or a grid. And then what you're going to do is you're going to add a new action, which is called an Ajax callback. Okay, and I'm going to go send email. And maybe I'm going a little too fast, so let me go a little slower. So I've created a button here. When the user clicks that button, I'm going to call a function. And this function using action JavaScript is going to be called what's called a callback. So what an Ajax callback is, the web browser, let's say they're working on a web browser, will make a callback to the server and run a function on the back end. And that function will be, in this case, would be, let's say, call it send email. Okay? So I'm going to create the function prototype, So what this does is it creates me a sample. So I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to actually open the function declarations and paste it in there and click OK. Okay, so now when I click this button here, it's going to do what's called an Ajax callback, and it's going to call this function right here on the back end. Now, this is where it gets
Dion,
really cool and interesting.
Sorry to interrupt, Dion.
Yes.
Could you move just a little bit slower? It's just there's a little bit of lag in the screen time, so just so that
I'm so sorry, guys. Yeah, let me go ahead and do that.
Thanks.
You got it. No, thank you. I apologize. I forget my network connection isn't the fastest known to mine. So I'm going to go ahead and start over real quick. I'm going to go ahead and put in a button here, and that button is going to be called Send Email. So on that button here, and then we're on a UX control, I'm going to call a function, and I'm going to use my action JavaScript to build that. So when this button is clicked, it's going to run this action JavaScript. Well, built into action JavaScript is a very powerful command called Ajax Callback. And the idea is this is just basically sending a message back to the server saying run a function, and you get to designate what that function is. So I'm going to go ahead and select Ajax Callback. Okay. So now it comes up with this genie. So the first thing I'm going to do is say send email. So that's the name of the function I would like to have called on the back end. And then what I'm going to do is, you'll notice once I've given the name here, I have this button down here called Create Function Prototype. So when it calls back, it's expecting to have a function on the server. So the nice thing that Alpha has done is that they've created a function prototype, essentially a template on it. So I can click on this button here, and you'll notice that it opened up basically a dialog with a pre-made function for me. And I can see that with comments or without comments. Highly recommend you do with comments, because basically all the tricks on what to do once this is called are in this text right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy this function prototype to the clipboard. Okay, so I've created the button with send email. Now, what I want to do now is I'm actually going to open my XBasic function declarations, which is equivalent to me clicking on this button right here, which is the XBasic functions. So I'm going to click on the Open XBasic Function Declarations. I'm going to put my mouse in here, and I'm going to paste that text in there. So now in my XBasic Decorations, I now have my function send email, which that button will call. And so I click OK, and I save it. So what I've done now so far is I've set up kind of the front end. I've created a button. I've created an action JavaScript that will call that function. Now that I've developed that, I can go into my XBasic functions, and you'll notice I have my send email function right here. And as I said before, this system will give you all the information, sort of sample code you need to actually run this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use the mandrel send email command. So what I'm going to do is the first thing I'm going to do is, let's say I need some information on the front end piece here. So I'm going to look, and let's say I wanted to get the customer ID. So I can go back into my function, and what's cool is when I click this button and I send that XBasic callback, the system will automatically collect all the data that's in the user interface at that time, either in a grid row or on the UX, and send that back to the function with me. So now when I'm in my basic function, I can say e.data submitted dot, and it was customer ID. So I can say customer ID is equal to that. So when the XBasic function was called, it created this thing called an E object that had all of the information that was in the web browser at that time. Now what I can do is once I then use this command called e.data_submitted and the name of the control to then get that data. So everything on that user interface is available. So in regards to your question, this works the same way with a grid, is that when the grid makes an Ajax callback, all of the column values are available to you so that you can say, okay, get this column like the GUI ID or ID of the record. Now within that, I can then write a piece of script right here of XBasic to then, based on those values that I brought back, I can use those in here in if-thens to say if customer ID is equal to this, send them this message. If it's equal to this, send them that message. Also, you could actually insert that record information into the message, so you can say the order status for customer ID XYZ is this. So it's going to be a combination of an Ajax callback and also this Mandrill script that is a quick alpha script that you can do. And it's just look for Mandrill alpha, and it will show up in your web browser, and you can copy the code directly out from here in that scenario. So I know that's a bit of a long-winded kind of response, but the idea behind it is on your control, let me go back to my control, you create a button either on the UX or on the grid that does an Ajax callback. You create a function for that callback. You extract the data from either the grid row or from the UX control into variables, and then use the Mandrill or the built-in email functions to then do conditional statements to send certain types of emails based on the information that you've collected from the front end. So that's kind of the strategy for implementing a email response using Ajax callbacks in the system. And once you've done one, and the documentation is very extensive, you can copy and paste it to your other controls. It's really flexible in terms of how you put that together. So I hope that hasn't been more confusing than helpful, but that's kind of the idea behind it, is using Ajax callbacks.
That's great. So our next question comes from Paul, who asks, what's the better practice? Should you call a SQL stored procedure from XBasic, or should you embed the SQL script into the XBasic code?
That is a great question, and I'd say the number one, there's two aspects to it, and it's a very good question because I've struggled this with myself, with my own there. I lean towards putting the stored procedure into the database, and for one reason only, is that when you put it into the database, the server, the database system, will optimize that stored procedure when it runs. So therefore, you'll get a lot of speed increases by using stored procedures, because once you've created and saved that stored procedure, the database essentially, quote unquote, compiles it into a faster executable piece. If you submit to the database from XBasic a set of SQL statements, it will work, but what will happen is the database will have to interpret those SQL statements, then run the query. So you get a little bit more overhead there. Now, depending on the complexity, it may not be a big thing. Now, the downside of that, so the benefit is speed. If you call the stored procedure directly from your front end, you're going to get a lot of speed increases and optimization based upon the database itself. The downside is now you're kind of managing code in two places. You're managing your stored procedure code in the database and your other there. And that's kind of can be problematic. So if you want to, and so because then you could just go in and in your XBasic modify the query, and you don't have to touch the database per se. So that's really your pros and cons, or your kind of trade-off is. So look at, if it's a pretty extensive stored procedure, I would definitely put it into the database and call it from the SQL cert or from XBasic, because you're going to get an enormous amount of speed improvements because the stored procedure is kind of running in its own environment. If they're smaller kind of SQL statements that, to be honest, you're not going to gain a bunch of benefit, I would go ahead and put it into XBasic, because then the maintainability is better because you're referencing it at one place, which is in your XBasic code. And in fact, you could put that into XBasic class libraries and manage it from there. So that's kind of your trade-offs and what you do it. I've done both, and what I've been doing more and more is less complex stored procedures, more small compartmentalized stored procedures that just gather data and then do any kind of data munging in my code in XBasic. So I get the best of both worlds, is that my query speed is very fast with these small stored procedures, and then I get the flexibility of XBasic code to manipulate the data once it's back in. And therefore, my life has turned out to be a little better. So I hope that gives you a couple pointers on how that would how you would approach that.
Great, thank you. Here's a question from Michael, and it regards Microsoft Access. He said, for an Access developer who uses functions like DLOOKUP, what's the best way to learn similar XBasic DB functions? And is
Great
there
point.
is there an Access to XBasic reference?
I'll answer the first one is no, there's not actually any kind of Access VBA kind of like here's the command in Access and that's a great idea, and I'm going to write that down. I'm going to copyright that right now, so Access to Alpha trademark. So no, that's a great idea, and that would migrate Alpha reference. I'm writing it down. The best way, just a little my history is that I actually used some videos from Steve Workings to start my training. So I used video training to kind of get used to it. And actually, Twin Peaks has a really good XBasic class. It's a self-paced training class put together by Mr. Talbot. It's up to date, kind of current, and very easy to follow. It's self-paced training. You can look that up at let's get that up here. It's Twin Peaks Research LLC, and again, it's a very affordable kind of self-paced video training there. So check out that from that, and that actually the nice thing about that is that's like a great introduction on XBasic, and they don't necessarily exactly compare it with Access, but I think when you get into it, you're going to start to see a lot of details regarding, or you'll start to get the feel for how XBasic works. Now, the other alternative is if I go to Alpha Software Video Library, Alpha has a full video library available for the users. And the benefit of this video library is, for instance, there's YouTube channels, and it walks you through the basics there. Now, it's a bit hit or miss because you kind of identify what the title of it and go into it, but that's the other real key way I learned how to do it was like, for instance, writing XBasic. Now, maybe a little bit older, like for instance, this is 2 years old, but the benefit of it is that you'll get the basics of the language. And then from there are a ton of great videos that are available. So I highly recommend check out the Alpha 5. Where's the Dave, do you know where the new one is? Let's go to Alpha 5, actually. You go to alpha5.com.
You want to go to video
software.
Yeah, it's videos.alphasoftware.com. That gives you a searchable list of all of our current videos.
There we go. That's it. So I'm going to put that in here. I'm going to go videos.alphasoftware.com.
Then you want to scroll down on that page and see where it says documentation videos, right? And this lets you do a full text search. Now, for the DB functions in particular, I have found that the help system inside Alpha 5 is pretty good once you get to the right page. And it does actually provide some pretty nice examples for, what is DB max, what is DB lookup, DB min.
Yeah, and here is, if you go into the development system and you click here, there's actually two things. There's the video finder, which allows you to, within the system, find those videos. And then also your open the documentation that allows you to open up the documentation. And in here, you're right, there's an extensive level of documentation available. And it takes a moment to update because it's kind of querying and getting the latest content from the server. So give it a moment, it'll pop up there. So you'll start seeing a full searchable setup. So database, so we have all the different, you can search actually, like for instance, executing a delete query on a SQL database. So this is how you would do it. It actually shows how to put together the pieces, etc. Talks about Database Explorer. So again, you access that through help, open documentation, and that will open up this window, and then you can do searches. There's actually a full table of contents if you want to drill down, like the Alpha DAO reference is really where it talks about all the different products we do and how we work with that and how we browse things, etc. So it's pretty extensive. And what it does do, which is kind of nice, is that for each of your topics, it actually puts up a tab and remembers. So if you go back to refer to something pretty often, if you're working on something, you'll open up these tabs up here, and after you've viewed something, you can go back. So if I want to see dropping tables are set, you'll notice now I have that tab up there. I'm working on something else. I can pop right back to dropping tables, and it will show me how to do that. So that gives you a little background there.
Thank you. So our next question here comes from John, who asks, when passing arguments or parameters from a dialog box or grid to another dialog box or grid, would you use a session variable or inline JavaScript or global variables or a JSON object? Or what would be the preferred method in a mobile web environment?
That's a great idea, a great concept. Okay. I'm going to go back to my development system, and let me see if I have that already built somewhere here. I had talked to someone about this before. So, oh, here we go. Great. I've got one right here. Okay. So I've already built these components here. One of the cool things, and a kind of a step up, is that Alpha allows you to nest UX controls. So you can actually nest different UX controls. So for instance, I've got a primary component, and then I have a subcomponent. So let's say my primary component is kind of my top level, but then I have a series of subcomponents that operate on different parts of my system. So if it's like a CRM system, it would be orders, people, users, products, etc. So let me go ahead and go into the subcomponent first. So I've created a UX control, a very simple one here that will open up here, that basically has a list in it of information. And this list, what I want to do is when I open up this UX control here, I want to filter this list based on data from another part of my system. So I'm starting from the bottom and moving up. So the one thing I want to do is on this UX control, I go to Properties. So I'm on my subcomponent, and I go to Properties, and I click on this search up here. By the way, very useful to know this. You can search on it, and I say Arguments. And so what I will do is I'm creating an argument on this UX component. So think of it as argument as like a global variable on my UX control. And this variable or argument is called item GUI ID. So in this case, I'm going to filter my list on this based upon the value of that. So when I create this argument, I tell it to get the argument from set value at runtime. Now I could, if I wanted to, get the value from a session variable, etc. That's perfectly acceptable. But for this demonstration, what I'm saying is basically, here's the variable on this UX, which is the item GUI ID, and what I want to do is I want to get the variable, I want to set it at runtime. So now I've set up my subcomponent. So it's basically a component with a variable that I can set on it that will do the filtering. Now I'm going to go back here and go into my primary component. So I open up my primary component, and you're going to see in here, I've got basically a top level where I have a GUI ID field here and a button, and then I've got an empty panel card here. So what I'm doing is this is the top level component, and trust me, I'll get back to your original question, just kind of giving the background on there. So within this, I have a very simple text field, and when I type the information in that text field, when I click button, what I want to do is actually load up my subcomponent in this panel card and set that argument. So when I go to button right here, load sub, and on that button, I have a click event. So I'm going to click that event, and you'll notice I have a single action JavaScript that says open a UX component. So I have a button on my top level component that says that. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on this to look at it. And it's a little bit busy, but I'm going to go ahead and show you what's this file there. So basically, when the person clicks this button here, it's going to load up a subcomponent in this panel card. And so the subcomponent is the one I was just showing you, the subcomponent UX there. I'm going to go ahead and I usually don't like to use cache components, although you can as a speed thing. But the important thing I'm going to do is when I load up that subcomponent, I'm going to actually put it into this panel card here. So I'm going to dynamically load that UX component into this panel card there. And now I want to show you a very important little feature, is that after I've selected the component I'm going to load, I now have the ability to do argument binding. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on argument bindings here. And you'll notice that it's because I selected that subcomponent and I had that argument name on it, it says, oh, guess what? This subcomponent has an argument called item GUI ID. Would you like to set that argument value? So on the left right here is the arguments that are been built into my subcomponent. In the middle is that value. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on this. And in this case, I'm going to insert my GUI ID field into it. So what happens is whatever GUI ID, whatever I put in this field and I hit go, then what it's going to do is it's going to grab that information and set and pass that information over to the argument in my subcomponent. So that's what I'm doing is I'm mapping this field on my high-level component to the argument value on my subcomponent and clicking OK. So now that I've got that, I can go ahead and run this. So now when I go into working preview, you'll notice that there's nothing here right now, but I have some text in there. And actually, let me do this. I know it's hard to see, so let me do it into a live preview. Hopefully, it'll be a little easier to see. Okay, yeah, it's probably a little easier to see. So I'm at my top level component here, and you notice that nothing is showing here. But now I have this GUI ID field right here, which is just text. In this case, it's the ALF key customer ID there. So I can click and go load sub, and what will happen is the system will, and why not? It should do that. Let me go ahead and working preview, do it there. Yeah, I might not have published them all there. Then this should have worked, and it's not. So why is that not working? Well, there's so much for a great demonstration today. Let me restart this here. Huh. Make sure I haven't screwed this up. It was working, Tony, there. Let's make sure it's the right one. Okay. Item GUI ID. Let me go back into my subcomponent. Save that, make sure it's been saved. I didn't do anything wrong. My working preview. Well, I apologize. For some reason, my demonstration isn't working properly right now. But what will happen is, and so much for the exciting reveal, I'd have to find out why this isn't working. But what will happen is when it loads up this subcomponent, I've passed the argument with a GUI ID, and then in this list right here, basically I have done my filter saying my filter is the customer ID is equal to that item GUI ID that's set on this. So long-winded, but what I would do is that if I were setting up my architecture, I would set up my subcomponents with arguments and pass things through arguments. And arguments can be set through page variables, session variables, at runtime using buttons that click. So that I know it was underwhelming on the final part of my demonstration, but what it does allow you to do is do that, pass them effectively. So arguments are very powerful because they're very controlled and they handle a lot of complexity for you. And once they're set up, you can reuse those subcomponents over and over because you can basically use the arguments to tailor the behavior of the subcomponent when it's displayed. So you can almost think of it as like a little widget or module that's available in your user interface.
Excellent. So here's a different question, and it has to do with embedded reports in UX components. And the question is there a way to turn on and off the capability to do HTML, PDF, Word, and Excel, which apparently are options when it is an embedded report, but not necessarily when it's embedded into a UX?
Interesting. Yeah, let me do this real quick. Let me go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and put an embedded control. Okay, so I'm back in my user interface, and I'm just using this UX controls just to make sure I understand is that when you embed a report, they're not seeing the ability to limit what the type of report is there. So let me go to embedded object here. I'm going to select a report, and I'm going to select an HTML report, which has been used. I built this using the HTML table layout report. So now I have it embedded. I've got the initial view, so I can say if I want to show this report. So when I run this, it should show. Well, let's see if it does over here. It's not working. Yeah, but this was. Let's go ahead and let me see this real quick. And let's see if it shows the PDF in here. Yeah, it's still rendering the PDF for me. There we go. I've got something where it's showing it outside of there, but it is doing there. I'm going to go ahead and change that real quick to HTML, which I like anyway. And you'll notice that it displays the HTML. A little hard to see, so let me go ahead and go to full preview and show you how that is. Okay, so you'll notice that that embedded report comes here. I've said I want to use it in HTML, and now you'll see I have PDF, Excel, Word, and those pieces there. So the question is, can I turn off the different capabilities of those? So let me go into my embedded object, and I would have to, I'm not sure, yeah, I'm not seeing object type, break, yeah. I'm not seeing how to do that. I know you can set the initial view. So I don't think you can do it with an embedded object, but what you can do is when you create a button on your user interface, and then on the click, what I'm doing is to show you the alternative way is that I've got a button here. I'm going to go ahead and modify the click event, and I'm going to add a new action, which is open a report label or letter layout. Okay. So I'm similarly doing, instead of embedding it, I'm actually going to dynamically set that, and then I can set the report to be, say, the HTML report. Now I can say, again, what initial view I want, and then there is the option down here to say, allow the person to export as Excel, yes or no, Word, yes or no, export to text or there. So I would say right off the bat, if you do an embedded report, it's going to automatically give you those capabilities, especially if it's HTML, the ability to export those there. I can go ahead and send that along to the team to see if they would like to add, the developers, see if they want to add that option. If you don't want to go that direction, then what you can do is use Action JavaScript to open the report. And if you want it to automatically display, you can set it this way and then just run a little piece of JavaScript when the UX control loads saying press button 1, and it will actually show this report in there. So you can actually trigger this button when it loads. It's kind of a workaround if you want that report to be automatically displayed when you go to this UX control. So I would say at this time, from my best of my understanding, is that if you embed a report, then you're going to get the options to export. When you click a button and do it through Action JavaScript, you will get that, and then ideally you could create Action JavaScript and then trigger it in your on dialog initialize. You could put a little piece of JavaScript to say press that button. You could hide the button and say press it, and it will show the report. So that's kind of a workaround near term.
Excellent. Here's a question from Brad, who asks, is there a way to capture the location information when a signature caption component is used to save a signature? And he's saying not when the UX component's data is updated or saved, but when they actually click the save button next to the signature capture button.
Well, when you click the save button, oh, I see, because then when you save the UX, it's actually persisting it back to there. The way I would do that is that, let me go ahead and add a signature control on here. Haven't used it a lot, so I'll have to look at that. Okay, so I can go all this signature. Okay, so I've got signature here, and so I can make those parameters. My guess is, and let me look at this, so I'm binding this signature to the database, and so naturally you can, when you save the data into the database, you can capture that information there. I'm looking to see if there is, this is a great question, seeing if there's any events that allow you to capture when this occurs. It's a pretty monolithic application, so I wonder if one thing I might look at doing is on this click event is you could what I would guess, and you could play with this, I don't know if it's going to work or not, is that with the signature on the click event, you could add an action JavaScript, and in action JavaScript is a geocode, I'm sorry, let me go back to that, I'm going a little too fast.
Thanks.
There's geolocation functions, and you can set fields to retrieve data. So what you could do is create a couple of hidden fields on your form, and then set the geolocation when this button is clicked. And my guess is when they click the button to save there, it's going to trigger this action JavaScript, and then you can actually capture the geolocation data, put it into fields, and then when the record is saved, save those. So you could have like geolocation at signature or something like that. So you would immediately grab that data, sort of temporarily put it into the text fields, and then link those text fields to the database so that when it's saved, you get the geolocation of when it's saved and the geolocation codes for when it was there. So that's what I would approach, is I would go ahead and look at doing action JavaScript on the click event, and then we just have to verify that that the save button on the signature capture actually triggers this Ajax JavaScript. And the way you could test that real quick is that you could, and we might be able to do that here, is we could just put in a little bit there and say, okay, alert, hello. Let's see what happens here and see if this, go in working preview. Yeah. So that looks like interesting enough. It didn't do it on the accept. Is so when I do this and I say accept, that didn't fire there. But when I clicked on this there, so let's see. Is there another? I'm trying to think that there's another. Yeah, I don't see a direct hook of when they actually hit that one button. So you have your different buttons, your clear, cancel, accept. So I'll pass that along to the development team, is that maybe you want to be able to have under the action, under the JavaScript here, is on sign. So when that is on sign, it would trigger some JavaScript that you could add some stuff there. So let me make a note on that, sign for, or see if there's a way to handle that capture signature. But just to go back to that real quick so you're aware of it, is that there, what is kind of nice within the system is that there are a whole bunch of geolocation functions that will allow you to, in action JavaScript, grab the current location information, so you don't you're not just forced to capture that data when the record is saved. So allow you to do that. Great. So I hope that gives some pointer. We'll look into how you would actually trap when the person clicks the sign button, when that happens.
So it looks like we have time for at least one more question. And
this is a great one. We got great questions this week.
Yeah, it's wonderful. This one has to do with the topic of subcomponents. It says, I have a lot of grids that use the row expanded controls. How can I emulate this in a UX component?
The row expanded controls. I'm a little newer to Alpha, so I didn't do as much grid work.
So basically,
it's
okay.
Yeah. No, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah. So basically, the expanded controls. There's a little icon. If you click on it, the button that the row that you're on will expand and show you more information underneath it. Mm-hmm. Okay.
One thing that's kind of cool, and I'm going to go ahead and create a button here, and this maybe give you some hint on what look at. So I'm just going to create a button here, and I'm going to go show expanded. Okay. So one of the nice things about using UX controls is they're much more user-friendly as far as doing user interface stuff. So what I'm going to do is one area that you want to explore is using containers, and specifically Windows-style containers. So I'm going to create a container. So I've created a button here, and what I want to do is kind of mimic a expanded content level. So I can go to container, and I'm going to go to a window, and I'm going to insert that after. So you'll notice I have this new little special type of container that's got a different color in it. And then this container is like any other container. I'm going to go ahead and put a piece of static text in there, and I'm going to say hello attendees. Okay, and I don't know if I apostrophe that, but that's the way it goes. So now that I have this content here, if I run this working preview, notice something. There's nothing there. And if I click Show Expanded, nothing happens there. Because right now, a window is by default hidden. But now I can go to this window and I want to set some window properties now. So it's sort of, think of it as like a pre-made window. So I'm going to click Window Properties. And what I want to do is I want it to be a drop-down. And actually, let's see, do I have a prop down? No, I'll just do it this way. And that what I want to do is I want to do a drop down, and let's see. So we'll just do that drop down right there. Okay. So now that I've created the style of this window or container, I'm going to go to this button, Show Expanded, and I'm going to go to the click event for my button, Show Expanded. So I click there, and I add a new action, and we have a great one in there, Show Container Window. So in my button for that button right there, I have something that says Show Container Window. Click OK. Now it's asking me, well, which container, because you could have multiple window components on the same UX, I'm going to do window number 1 and click OK and save. So now what I've done is add an action to this button right here to show this window. So now I go in here, and now when I click Show Expanded, you'll notice that it's created a window right here showing some extended amount of data. And let me go ahead and go into working our live preview because it looks a little nicer. You'll see it a little more effectively there. So now I've got my Show Expanded button. I can click right there. So it's mimicking that idea of you have like some data and then you want to expand and show more data. Now the cool thing about this is that these are just controls on the interface. So you can actually reference any other control on the interface to populate the data here. So when I click that Show Expanded, I could run an Ajax callback, make a query to the database, update some fields, and then show this window with that information into it. Vice versa, if the data is already available, when I click this Show Expanded, I could run a little piece of JavaScript, grab some information from the existing items like the geolocate or anything like that, and show it. And you're not limited in terms of what controls can be in this window. Those can be many, many different type of controls. They could be mapping controls. They could be whole other grids. And you could pass to this grid like a query. So you can essentially mimic the grid within a grid capability. So explore using window controls and the action JavaScript to show it, and that I think will allow you to kind of mimic that behavior that you're looking for.
Excellent. Well, it looks like we're out of time. I had actually a couple people ask today if today's session is being recorded, and it is. If you want to just send an email to guides@alphasoftware.com or just to me, dave@alphasoftware.com. If you give me a day or two, I will send you a link to that video once I have it compiled and uploaded. So I would like to thank everyone again for attending, and I'd like to thank Dion for presenting, and we hope to see you at a future webinar. Take care. Bye-bye.